Again, thank you so much for joining our webinar on the ad supply chain risks that are currently plaguing the industry. I am Tyler Lochner. I'm Pixelate's VP of Research and Platform Growth. And I'm joined here today by both Patrick and Shanze, who will introduce themselves in a second. At Pixelate, I lead our research. Hopefully you've downloaded some of our research reports. If not, it's pixelate.com/reports. We cover a variety of topics, including a lot of risk-based topics. And in this webinar, we're going to highlight some of our recent research. But I will go ahead and kick it over to Shanze and Patrick so they can introduce themselves and we can jump right in.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. I am the Data Protection and Privacy Counsel here at Pixelate. I advise the company on various data privacy aspects as well as different legal considerations with a particular focus on the children's privacy landscape.
And I'm Patrick McClure, I'm Director of Technical Product Management for Pixelate's Trust and Safety Ratings, which includes the publisher and seller trust indices. And I've kind of led the charge on a lot of the data science and methodologies that power all the reports that Tyler was talking about.
Yeah, thank you both. And Patrick and Shanze are a part of a larger team at Pixelate. We call it our Ad Fraud and Compliance Research Team or AFAC Research Team. And everyone on the team puts in a lot of work to put together these research reports for the industry. And today we're going to dive into some reports that focus on risks within the ad supply chain on two specific areas. One is ad waste. So that could be ad waste in a variety of ways, whether it's fraud, right, invalid traffic, or other forms of risk such as made for advertising. And then we're also going to be sharing some data and insights from some of our privacy reports from the first half of 2025, led by Shanze, led by other legal experts on our team, Yusra, as well as the rest of our research team. So before we jump into these, I wanted to give a brief overview of Pixelate's and Pixelate's solutions. So Pixelate is a platform for the digital ad risk management and privacy compliance. And we offer a variety of solutions within our platform, starting with Pixelate Analytics. This gives you first-party risk assessment on IVT, compliance, brand safety, viewability, very granular data on very specific types of invalid traffic impacting your campaign, URL level insights, subdomain level insights, really rich first-party data. The Media Ratings Terminal is our third-party risk assessment. So this enables you to look up any website, any mobile app, any CTV app, and get a wealth of information about those apps, including their popularity by DMA, invalid traffic risk, where the app is registered, whether it's privately registered, the top authorized sellers, and much more information, brand safety ratings. You can also, it's a fantastic tool for discovery. You can kind of build your own inclusion or exclusion lists through the Media Ratings Terminal, and you will hear us reference it several times throughout our research here. Really, the data in the Media Ratings Terminal is what powers a lot of our research at Pixelate. We also have our data feeds, which are pre-bid block lists. This allows you to isolate and block high-risk apps, high-risk IP addresses, user agents. We've got lists specific for IPv4 and IPv6. So that is, of course, when you combine all three of these, the pre-bid blocking, the post-bid analytics, and then the Media Ratings Terminal for discovery. That is how you end up with the complete protection across the board through Pixelate solutions. And then we also have privacy compliance tools baked into a lot of these products. So for example, the Media Ratings Terminal will show you whether or not an app has a privacy policy, or whether or not it is child directed, or what type of data points are being shared in the ad bid stream. And you can start to measure your privacy compliance as well. And then a free solution that Pixelate brings is the seller and publisher trust indexes. This is, I would say, what our research team is most well known for in the industry. On a monthly basis, we publish the Publisher Trust Index, which surfaces the top apps or websites for overall open programmatic ad quality. And on a quarterly basis, we publish the Seller Trust Index. Last year, we ranked roughly 40 to 50 SSPs or ad sellers based on their overall quality. This is based on invalid traffic, reach, exposure to MFA, brand safety, et cetera, a variety of factors. You can see it on our website. In the last 6 to 9 months, we've actually now started ranking over 500 individual sellers. So head over to ratings.pixalate.com. You can see all of those rankings updated every month and every quarter for free. So with that said, actually real quick, if you have any questions, please use the question box. Oftentimes we get a lot of questions during these webinars. If we have time to answer some of them at the end, we will. If not, we will follow up with you, whether it's through a blog post where we compile a lot of the questions together or individually. Please make use of that question box. So with all that introduction aside, I wanted to jump now into the primary topic of our conversation here, which is ad waste risks. Again, I said this at the top, this could be a variety of different types of waste. The most common, and you know what Pixalate has done for over a decade now, is ad fraud detection and prevention. So you can see here, this is from our Q1 2025 global invalid traffic benchmarks. We measured almost $5 billion worth of ad spend, open programmatic ad spend specifically, wasted on invalid traffic. So Patrick, can you give us some more insight into this research and these figures and kind of how they've tracked over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So Pixalate has a pretty comprehensive view of the open programmatic marketplace. For this report in particular, we measured over 100 billion ad impressions to kind of compile this research. And as you mentioned, we saw almost $5 billion estimated lost in global ad spend due to IVT and ad fraud. The big number that stands out here is that 2.79 billion, 31% of mobile app traffic in Q1 that we marked as IVT. The 18% on CTV and web is also concerning. And I think overall, this whole report just highlights the persistent and high level of risk that exists across all these platforms and the vulnerability that there always is to sophisticated fraud schemes.
Yeah, and this actual benchmark report is one that Pixalate's been publishing since at least 2017, and we've tracked these figures on a quarterly basis. And once we added connected TV to this report, that was the highest risk channel. It was between 25 to 30% IVT. That has kind of slowly dropped down. We've seen it pretty consistently below 20%, 15 to 20%. Mobile apps were at about 25%. They've dropped down to about 20%, but more recently they've started to rise a bit again, with the Q1 figure actually being the highest we've seen since benchmarking this report for mobile app IVT rates. So Patrick, I'm curious if you can share with us what is happening in the mobile app space. Why did that number kind of start to rise again? What specific types of IVT have we recently seen in the mobile app ecosystem?
Definitely. One thing in particular that Pixalate has noticed an uptake in, especially in the mobile app ecosystem, is what we call impression fraud. This is a form of IVT in which anomalous users generate an extremely high number of impressions in just a short amount of time, which is a signal for botted or generated traffic. One thing Pixalate's doing to combat this is making continuous additions to our high-risk mobile app block lists, with the aim of identifying these risky sources of app traffic and improving traffic quality across the ecosystem.
And I'm glad you brought up a specific type of IVT. Pixalate measures over 40 unique types of IVT, and if you use the Pixalate Analytics dashboard, you can see your exact exposure. If your ad fraud spiked in a given month or in a given region, you can actually look at what was the very specific type of IVT that was causing that spike. It's not just all clumped together as ad fraud or invalid traffic. And then another note is these numbers that you're seeing here are on a global level, but what Pixalate actually started doing in, I want to say Q3 of last year, we actually started publishing this report on a country by country basis. So the mobile app IVT rate might be significantly lower in one country versus another. Web might be spiked in one country. CTV might be higher or lower in different countries. So what our reports do, if you go through, you can kind of compare your key markets or maybe emerging markets. And then we also publish these reports on a regional global level. So Patrick, I wanted to kind of pick your brain here a little bit. What are your takeaways here when you look at this data? This is web that we're seeing here, for example. North America is almost 10% higher if you just do the percentage comparison, then the global rate, what should people be taking away from looking at this type of data?
I think the biggest takeaway is just the existence of these regional variations. We can see, EMEA here is sitting 5% beneath the global average on web ad fraud, compared to North America, where it may be a little riskier. Like you mentioned, we put these reports out at the country level specifically for this reason, because it's critical for ad buyers to factor into their strategies in order to mitigate risk.
Yeah, and again, you can always reference the Pixalate Media Ratings terminal to see where one app might have most of its traffic coming from. And Shanzeh, I don't think this has actually happened, but I do want to surface that over the years, Pixalate has uncovered a lot of different ad fraud schemes. And when mobile apps are involved, kind of a recurring theme that we've seen is that it might be bot generated traffic. It might be coming from a server, for example. But they might be using real users' data as part of that ad bid stream information to make it appear real. And of course, if they're tapping into a real user's phone, real user data is also being used as part of some of these fraud schemes. So my question for you is, what potential privacy risks are kind of not really discussed or really haven't come to light with these ad fraud schemes that are misusing potentially ill-begotten user data, especially when you look at these global rates? Can you talk to maybe any hidden risks there?
Sure. So ad tech platforms, as you mentioned, engaging with traffic sources that are involved in fraud schemes, for example, those that impersonate real user behavior through mimicking real IPs or other personal identifiers without the original user's informed consent or affirmative consent, may expose themselves to regulatory as well as legal risk under data protection and even certain computer fraud laws. For instance, practices involving data like IP addresses that are obtained without the user's consent, unlawfully processed for spoofing purposes, and then passed on further to be used for commercial purposes by ad tech platforms would be highly problematic under various data protection regimes, but especially the GDPR. These poor practices or lack of any due diligence at all can most likely also constitute deceptive practices or unauthorized use on part of the platforms that use, collect, or even purchase such personal data.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. You mentioned due diligence. I think that's a really probably critical term there. These risks are known to exist. I think just saying, oh, we didn't know that we didn't know that was happening, we didn't even know that was a risk, is not really an excuse anymore with these global privacy regulations. Now, of course, you can go download these reports. You can look at these different ad fraud rates by country, as we mentioned. But moving on to another high driver of ad waste, or at least ad risk, is MFA. Now, this was a topic that I would say really sparked close to 2 years ago, but it's something that Pixalate has been closely monitoring ever since on a quarterly basis. We do publish lists of high-risk MFA apps. Our seller trust index ranks every seller by their own exposure to MFA websites, but we actually are benchmarking the potential money spent on MFA websites. So on desktop and mobile web globally, we estimated that in Q1, 701 million was spent on MFA. Now, I will say there are some potential signs for improvement. We'll get to that on the next page. But Patrick, before we get there, walk us through these high-level numbers and really how Pixalate arrives at them.
Of course. So MFA, made for advertising, like Tyler said, has been a pretty hot topic. Pixalate has been really increasing the amount that we are focusing our research on and kind of trying to uncover, a lot of the impact of MFA. The largest impact is on the desktop side of things. Over 700 million in estimated ad spend went to MFA websites, but it's not non-existent on mobile and CTV as well, where we're seeing 64 and $13 million respectively spent on MFA apps in Q1 2025. Some of the trends we're seeing is, targeting like mobile games. We're seeing a rise in that. And on CTV, as expected, kind of the movie and TV category is where majority of the MFA ad spend is going. One thing to note that's kind of a major red flag, an indicator of high risk for MFA, is the fact that almost 100% of the CTV apps we flagged and 90% of the mobile apps we flagged went to developers that are hiding behind private or blank domains, which makes them incredibly difficult for buyers to vet. You combine that with increased IVT rates on MFA domains, and you see why we're flagging these as high risk.
Yeah, that's a great point to bring up, that kind of hidden domain or private registration. Of course, some companies that are very legitimate use it, but in Pixelate's experience, we've seen that a relatively high correlation between that and potential ad waste risk. You can always look up in the media ratings terminal where an app is registered or whether it's private. And in the media ratings terminal, we also denote whether or not an app or website is high, medium, or low risk for MFA. But I teased this a little bit earlier. There are some signs of improvement, right, Patrick? So tell us, I know you've personally been the one kind of pulling this data and analyzing it. What have you seen in the MFA space over the last 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, like you said, it's not all bad news. We are seeing positive developments here. The trend for MFA ad spend and share of domains is going down. We saw about 6% of unique websites were being flagged as likely MFA in December 2024, down to just 4% in March 25. Ad spend also fell from 13% late last year to just 9% at the end of Q1. So, it's an early sign that these industry-wide efforts to defund MFA are having a real impact, but it's a trend that requires continued focus and, us doing our due diligence to make sure that, this stays at a lower level.
Yeah, and it definitely is not going away. A personal anecdote over the weekend, my wife was in the car and she was like, oh no, there's a ride at Disney World closing, and she clicked it. It was a sponsored ad from Facebook. And she read the article and it was a hoax, right? Or it was closed for maintenance just for a couple days. But of course, the page was littered with ads. So MFA is still out there. Hopefully, like you said, Patrick, this is early signs that some of those industry-wide efforts are improving. But moving on now to a very CTV specific topic, and one that Pixelate has taken very seriously, and I would say led the charge on over the years, is this concept of CTV bundle IDs. And Patrick, I'll let you explain from a more technical perspective in a minute, but at a very high level, we call these malified CTV bundle IDs, and it kind of lumps together several different types of bundle IDs. It's either straight fraudulent bundle IDs, malformed bundle IDs, or completely unidentified bundle IDs. And a bundle ID is an app identifier. So Patrick, you've been tracking this. We've been publishing this report on a quarterly basis. What is the key takeaway here, and why is this money actually at risk, right? It's not necessarily fraud. Some of it is fraud. Not all of it is fraud, but why is it a risk even if it's not straight invalid traffic?
At the heart of the issue, it's a transparency issue. Bundle IDs, which is just a string of text meant to identify an app, they're not very well regulated on the CTV side of things, especially compared to mobile, where it's, your bundle ID is your app ID and there's not much leeway there. On the CTV side of things, there's a lot of fuzziness. And what happens is you get bundle IDs that are either misrepresenting apps or just completely unidentifiable, and you have no idea where that ad may be. We found that about 2% of all CTV ad impressions are going to these malformed or completely unidentifiable bundle IDs. On a similar note, 22% of all unique bundle IDs were detected for mobile-only apps that don't even exist on CTV, which is a big red flag for app spoofing. So you can see how these signals kind of may line up with higher risk traffic. The problem does vary by platform. We did a deep dive on Roku and we found that only about 51% of ad traffic was actually using the verifiable App Store ID. The other 49% either required Pixelate technology to map it to a real app, and 3% couldn't be mapped at all. And those unmapped bundle IDs are often junk strings like IQ, which is not actually referring to a singular app, or the text app bundle, which gives you no information about where that app is or where that ad is going.
Yeah, and this is a topic Pixelate, again, has been tracking for a while. We're actually currently in the process of adding a constantly updated list of these types of bundle IDs to our website for free, where you can go and see kind of the top offenders. And I will say, whenever we're speaking to really anybody in the industry, the challenges with CTV bundle ID mapping, unidentified bundle IDs is a persistent, constant problem. So if you struggle with this problem whatsoever, please reach out to Pixalate. We do have ways to help you with this. Now, another problem, and this veers more into the world of ad fraud, is unauthorized sellers or ad seller misrepresentation. Now, Pixalate actually just published this report this morning, so you can go download that, pixalate.com/reports. This is from our Q1 data. Patrick, I'm going to let you explain from a technical perspective how Pixalate's measuring this, what exactly is an unauthorized or misrepresented seller, but we're estimating that about $4 billion is at risk to unauthorized sellers. Now, a large part of this will be fraud, right? A lot of that is already captured in that IVT metric we showed earlier, but some of it is maybe misuse of ads.txt. So Patrick, can you explain from a technical perspective what we're doing and what are the implications here? And of course, I want you to dive a little bit into the mobile app number being as high as it is.
Right. So what we're looking at, and we've kind of made a big emphasis on this supply chain verification over the past few years, is looking at the IAB Tech Lab supply chain object, which is sort of a receipt at each step of the way for an ad impression. Pixalate also uses the ads.txt files and sellers.json files to sort of cross-reference every step in the supply chain to make sure everybody's authorized, everything is verified, and everything kind of passes all the checks to make sure that you've got transparency from start to finish. When we don't see that, when we see unauthorized sellers, we see a higher correlation with IVT and ad fraud, as well as just that lack of transparency. Maybe there's a gap. Maybe this is an unauthorized publisher. It can be all of these things. And so we've been tracking this over time as well. One thing we note is that, if you want to go to the next slide, Tyler, we do see some slight improvements on the CTV and mobile side compared to from Q4 to Q1, kind of moving down from 39% unauthorized on mobile to 35% here. So there are some improvements happening, but we see that there's still a failure rate high enough that we need to continue to enforce the good ads.txt, sellers JSON, and supply chain object behavior.
Yeah, and Patrick, of course, you can use Pixalate Analytics to see your specific campaigns impact and exposure to misrepresented or unauthorized sellers. Now, shifting gears to privacy compliance risks. We got Shanze here to talk about 2 research reports that we did over the first half of 2025 that were about 6 months worth of effort. Some of these research reports started almost a year ago now from today's date. One of them dived into COPPA, or Children's Online Privacy. And Shanze, can you tell us what you and the research team found in this report? What was the scope of the report, and what are the implications for the ad industry?
Sure. So COPPA, as we know, is a crucial and perhaps the only comprehensive US federal law designed specifically to protect the online privacy of children under the age of 13. Our Q1 2025 investigation that you're sharing on your slides here focused on apps that we found to be likely child-directed and registered in the US. And the findings that we got were deeply concerning. We found that 286 of these apps, or 17% of them, are at a high risk of being non-compliant with the COPPA rule. And this is despite the fact that they are covered under the law and are likely sharing children's personal information in the ad bid stream. The reasons for this non-compliance are fundamental failures on part of the operators, as we have detected. A shocking 79%, or 225 apps, are missing a specific children's privacy disclosure as required in their online notices or privacy policies, which, as we know, is a core obligation under Section 312.4 subsection D of the COPPA rule. Even more disturbing is the fact that 53%, or 153 apps of these same non-compliant apps, are actively requesting what we deem as sensitive permissions, like access to a device's location, camera, or microphone. And we found that all of these apps, or 286 of these apps, were sharing personal information like device IDs, location, in the ad bid stream, which, as we probably know, can lead to significant penalties from regulators such as the FTC or the attorneys general. So in order to promote accountability and to promote accountability, our full report on this topic identifies many of these apps by name and developer, including apps which have hundreds of thousands of active users that we've estimated, which, as you can imagine, makes them quite popular apps.
Yeah, and as Shanze mentioned, if you actually download this report, you will get the full list of 286 likely non-compliant apps. And I will make just a quick note here. This report focused on apps that are specifically registered in the United States, but Shanze, COPPA does apply to apps that are not registered in the United States. So 286 is a far underestimation of the real number of apps out there likely violating COPPA, right?
Correct. The COPPA rule does apply to operators or apps that are not registered in the US, as long as they have children or users that are using those apps in the US.
Yeah. Now, again, go download this report, see your own exposure to these 286 apps. And moving over to GDPR and Europe, we conducted a similar research report there. Shanze, I'll pass it over to you in a second, but what we did here as well, we published the full list, almost 15,000 apps. So please go download this report, see if your exposure to these 15,000 apps. But Shanze, what did we look at through the lens of GDPR, and what did we find?
Right. So this investigation, conducted with the help of our wonderful legal colleague Yusra Kiani, uncovered another massive essential compliance failure. We identified nearly 15,000 ad-enabled mobile apps available to download in the EU and the UK that had no detectable privacy policy or privacy notices whatsoever. So under the GDPR, a clear and conspicuous privacy policy is not optional. It is a requirement under Articles 5, 12, 13, and 14 of the law. And as a result of that, the scale of this kind of exposure is pretty immense. And we've estimated that over 32 million lifetime users across the EU and the UK have had their personal data potentially unlawfully processed by these very apps since their inception and availability to download from the app stores. These compliance failures, they create a sort of ripple effect of risk across the entire supply chain. For instance, 92% of these apps with no privacy policies, which is over 13,700 apps, list Google Ad Exchange in their app ads.txt files. So when an SSP, an ad exchange platform, or an advertiser works with an app that has no privacy policy at all, they are taking on that enormous legal risk as well. And this exposes them to hefty fines, reputational damage, as well as a loss of consumer trust. In this situation, proving that the user's original consent was obtained for data processing under the GDPR can become next to impossible. And just as with our COPPA report, our full version of the GDPR evasion report names these apps to hold the ecosystem accountable. We found, again, popular apps with hundreds of thousands of European users apparently operating without any privacy policy at all.
Yeah, and our research led by Shanze, and she mentioned Yusra, will continue on the privacy front. We're actually working on a VPC, or verifiable parental consent, report right now for ad-enabled apps. We've got reports on GDPR for children, looking similar to our COPPA report in the United States, but applied to Europe. We've got reports on location data sharing, the extent of that, and of course, all of our reports we do our best to make it clear what is the actual risk that SSPs or ad partners have, including downstream ad partners. As Shanze just mentioned, downstream partners also are at risk, even if they're not the first node in the chain, so to speak. So again, keep tabs with pixalate.com/reports on these privacy reports and other ad fraud and ad waste risk reports. We are out of time. That went really fast. Patrick and Shanze, thank you both so much for joining us. I will say to the audience real quick, we take the feedback on our reports very, very seriously. A lot of our reports are actually driven by that feedback that we get, whether or not to include a certain data point, exclude a certain data point, spin up an entire brand new report. we want to hear from you on what are the challenges you're facing and how might Pixalate be able to provide data that you can then benchmark your own company against, or some competitors, or maybe you're onboarding new partners and you want to see how they benchmark against. Very likely Pixalate either already publishes a report on that topic or can produce one that can help you. So please reach out to us with that feedback. We unfortunately don't have time for questions, but we will reach out to you if you did drop a question. I see a couple in there right now. And Shanze and Patrick, thank you both so much for joining us. And that is all. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.